This is a true story. I couldn't tell anyone until now. When I was walking home from school, I came across some coats hanging on a fence. Now it had been raining real bad all night and all day, and they looked like they had been there for a while. One was red, puffy. It looked like it would keep you warm. The other was gray and dreary, more like a sweatshirt. They had a sadness about them, like they were abandoned. My first thought was someone had hung them to dry. They were both my size, but didn't seem much like something a boy would wear. With that said, I was never choosy. It sucks to be poor. I'd go through dumpsters and hang outside restaurants, waiting for leftovers. One time, I was so hungry that I thought about stealing something, but I never did. I considered myself a good person, and if it's not mine, then it's not mine. They made fun of me a lot, calling me poor man. Not a great name, but it is what it is. When I was younger, I stopped going to birthday parties because we couldn't give a gift. One thing I did love to do was draw. I drew anything and everything I'd see. Dad hated me drawing for some reason, and actually said I couldn't draw at home. So, I drew at the library or in one of my hideouts. Now, back to these coats. I needed a coat real bad and well, there were two of them. As much as I wanted to take them, and yes, I wanted them both, I didn't. It's not that anyone needed them more than me. They didn't. I'd walk home back and forth from school, freezing, all the time, and I needed a coat bad. It was just that I didn't want to steal and take something away from someone else who needed it more than me. I ended up going home and did my homework. Dad never came back that night, and the rain just started belted down. God, it was relentless, like someone just hammering nails on the roof. While I wasn't allowed to watch TV, I imagined the news was going to say that it was going to be wet for the whole next week. As I walked to school, the coats were still there. School happened. Nothing notable as I remember. As the thunder rumbled in the sky, I looked up, thinking maybe they fell out of a plane. I considered looking around to see if there was any luggage. My gut was no one was coming back for them, so I took it. I know it might seem weird to you that I made such a big deal out of these coats, but when I was younger, my mom, before she died, gave me a baseball. She said it was a very special baseball that was signed and worth a lot of money. I hid it in a tree, just to be sure that my dad wouldn't take it and sell it. There was a project at school where they asked us to give a presentation to the class. It was about what meant something to you, and like the biggest idiot, I told the class about my ball. Man, I didn't think much about it. A few weeks later, I went to check up on it and it was gone. I never found out who took it, but having something taken from you is the worst feeling ever. Now back in my trailer, it was so bad, you could see the rain flying horizontally through the air. I checked to see if there was a name tag in the coat. Mad, speaking of mad, my dad was furious when he saw me wearing the new coat. He screamed at me and asked me where I got it. I told him I found it near the river. He grabbed me by my shoulders and yelled I shouldn't pick up stuff that belonged to others and went to hit me. I stepped back, just missed his fist. Then I ran out the door as fast as I could. It sucks to have a dad who thinks you're a punching bag, but that was him, and while I loved him, he also made my life a living hell. As I ran through the woods, I heard his voice bellow out behind me as he yelled out my name. I sure as hell didn't stop. Instead, I ran to the school where I knew there was an unlocked shed that I could always crash in. It was kind of like my second home. I called it Shed Hotel. I stayed there all night. I never went home and must have been the first one at school that day. The rain continued to attack me on the way to the main building, but that coat was awesome. At lunch I sat alone. I was a little out in the rain, but it was the only bench available. I didn't mind much as I had my coat on. Of course, I didn't have a lunch, so I wanted to be as far away from the smell of food as possible. There was some commotion at the other end and a silence. As I saw some hats walk across the courtyard, I recognized them right away as they were the local sheriffs. They had been in my house a long time ago to speak with my dad about something when my mom died. The minute they went to the principal's office, everyone continued chattering. I asked someone what was going on, and they looked at me like I was an alien. Everyone seemed to know more than me. Maybe it was because I wasn't allowed to watch TV. Or maybe it was because I didn't really have any friends. I don't know. Eventually, a sixth grader told me that too. Everyone was sad. The two girls I didn't know who had been playing in the woods had just vanished. There were even news vans parked outside on the street, next to the school, with reporters trying to interview parents. A sheriff was handing out sheets of papers, so I went up to him. Turns out there were missing posters, drawn by a sketch artist. One of the girls was called Catherine, and the other, Madeleine. Madeleine had on a similar coat to mine. Wait! It suddenly occurred to me that Mad could be Madeline. My heart raced. Had I taken her coat? As I stood there, in front of the officer, I felt like I'd get in so much trouble if he knew. He stared at me, and then he stared at the coat. I wanted him to figure it out for himself, and ask me about the coat, but he didn't. I slowly walked away and sat in the classroom thinking about what I should do. As kids came in, they talked about how sheriffs were everywhere searching for Matt and Catherine. I stared at the coat in the sketch, and then looked at the reflection of the real thing in the window. I was so scared that someone would suddenly say I had that coat on, and scared that no one would realize. I thought about going into the bathroom and just dumping the coat, and then letting someone else know that it was in there. Well, the sheriff came into my classroom. He asked everyone if we had seen anything. No one answered. He gave us a talk on not going off with strangers and how dangerous it could be. Someone asked him about some other kids that went missing a few years back. Well, I didn't know about them, but the sheriff said it was true. Matt and Catherine weren't the first kids to go missing in our town. When the sheriff left, I felt so bad. Tears welled up on my face, and I pushed them out of the way. I felt as all of me as kids looked my way. I got up and I ran out, not because of them, but because I had to do what was right. I mean, those girls might be on their last breaths, and if I didn't help, they might be lost from the world forever. The sheriff was in the hallway and turned to me as I ran out the door. As I approached, he calmly and warmly assured me, "Don't be afraid. We'll catch whoever did this." I shook my head, showing him my coat, telling that it was Matt's. I thought he was going to be angry and hit me, just like my dad, but he wasn't. He was thankful, and he asked me to follow him. We went into the principal's office. I sat there alone for about 10 minutes before he came in and gave me a sheriff's jacket. It was several sizes too big, but really warm. He said it was mine for helping him out, and he asked me if I'd show him exactly where I found the coats. I said of course I'd help them, and led them to the fence. As we arrived, we were met by another detective, who was also a police sketch artist. When we were there, he asked me where the other coat was. I told him it was at my place and that my dad probably had it. He asked me where I lived and asked who my dad was. The sheriff then told me something that shook me to my core. He said years ago when I was young, when my mom disappeared, some other kids had gone missing too. My mom had been to the police station with a drawing. Apparently it was one of mine. It was of a man with two girls, both in raincoats with flower patterns. It made my dad a suspect in their disappearance, but they could never get enough evidence. That's when my mom disappeared. Then they said they thought it was him, but again, they couldn't prove it. They asked me to think really, really hard, whether I knew anything that could help them. I wish I did, but I couldn't think of anything. The detective asked if I had ever kept any of my old drawings. I'd had them under my mattress. Now I secretly kept everything there that I'd ever drawn from a very, very young age. Ever since I lost my mom, and well, I didn't want to lose anything else. We all went to my trailer together. Dad wasn't home. I heard some of the cops say that they had a warrant for his arrest, which was confirmed by the detective as he looked over my pictures. Well, I hadn't looked at some of them in a very long time, and I didn't remember most of them. But I could see how as I grew up they got better. Some of the drawings were of two girls, both in raincoats with flower patterns. They questioned me about them, but I couldn't really remember anything. I couldn't remember even ever drawing them. There were pictures of a woman with long, black hair. I knew that was my mom. I loved her smile, and then there was the man in black. This was my dad. He had an evil face and large, monstrous hands. I was often walking in the woods, and it was chasing me and just jumping out from the trees behind me. The detective, whose name was Jason, told me how good the drawings were and that I had a lot of talent. He was trying to help me remember stuff, and whenever I said anything, I guess that was important, his eyes would widen and even look over the sheriff. Now, there was a blue rectangle in several of the pictures. In one, the two girls with raincoats. They asked me if it was a house. I couldn't remember what it was, until I saw a photo with a ladder on top of it. My eyes lit up and they instantly knew that I knew where it was. On one side of the trailer park was a very rocky cliff edge. Everyone stayed away from it because it was so dangerous. But I remember once my dad taking a rope ladder there. I remember this because I followed him, thinking that maybe he was setting up a swing for me. But he wasn't, and I forgot all about it, until now. The sheriff ordered officers to that area. Now they had body cameras on them. So I watched a video on a monitor, pointing out exactly where I saw my dad take that ladder.
Approach with extreme caution. We see a cage. He's here. Suspect is here.
As I watched, suddenly I heard gunfire as one of the officers went down. Everyone flinched. The sheriff yelled commands and panicked and screaming voices came through the radio, and then more shots. Jason shuffled me into the other room so I couldn't tell what was going on. About half an hour later, the sheriff came in, and Jason asked if the girls had been found, but the sheriff looked sad. He told Jason to wait outside and then sat down to break some news to me. He said that my dad was there and was shot, dead. When I asked if he got the girls, and he nodded his head and whispered, "They're safe." I couldn't help but smile. They were no longer lost. While I loved my dad, I felt somewhat relieved. It meant, for sure, I knew my life was going to change, but to be honest, he was, as Billie Eilish says, a bad guy. By the way, this story doesn't end bad. I graduated high school, went to college, graduated, went to Quantico, became an FBI agent. It wasn't all good. I did lose my leg at some point, but I'll save that story for another time. I now hunt bad guys, and while I'm not proud that my dad was the raincoat killer, I can say this to all bad guys out there. Don't turn around. I'll be right behind you.